My wife left me for my brother. Should I forgive them? I never thought betrayal would come from the two people I loved the most, my wife, Emily, and my brother, Jake. But life has a way of twisting the knife where it hurts the most. It started subtly. Stolen glances, inside jokes I wasn't part of. I chalked it up to my paranoia, to overthinking. After all, Jake was my older brother, the guy who taught me how to ride a bike, who defended me from bullies in school. Emily was my partner of 6 years, the love of my life. Surely I was imagining things, until I wasn't. I came home early from work one day, tired and ready to surprise Emily with dinner. Instead, I walked into my own personal nightmare. Emily, in our bed, tangled up with Jake. Time slowed. My breath caught. A sickening weight settled in my gut. I wanted to scream, to break something, to demand answers. But all I could do was stand there as they scrambled for words that didn't matter. I didn't mean for this to happen, Jake said, as if that made a difference. Emily wiped at her tears, but I couldn't find sympathy for her. We didn't want to hurt you, but what? I cut in, my voice hollow. You love him? She hesitated. That hesitation was worse than if she'd said yes. I left that night, letting the cold swallow me as I drove aimlessly. Questions spun in my head. How long? Did they ever regret it? Was I blind, or had I just refused to see it? Days passed, then weeks. Emily moved in with Jake. My parents tried to keep the peace, but how do you make peace with betrayal? I ignored my brother's texts, ignored Emily's calls. Then, one evening, Jake showed up at my doorstep. I almost slammed the door in his face, but his eyes, so full of regret, made me pause. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said, but I need to ask for it anyway. I let him talk. He admitted it had been happening for months. He swore he hadn't planned it, that it had just happened, as if love was some force neither of them could control. I stared at him, feeling nothing. I had spent so long being angry, being shattered, but now there was only exhaustion. Do you love her? I asked. His silence spoke volumes. I sighed. Then I hope she's worth losing your brother over. Forgiveness? I didn't know if I had it in me. Maybe one day, but not today. And that, I decided, was enough. Days turned to weeks, then months. Life moved on, but I remained stuck. The betrayal had carved a hole in my chest, one that no amount of time could seem to fill. I cut ties with Jake and Emily completely. No calls, no texts, no accidental run-ins. I changed my routine to avoid places they might be. I even considered moving to another city, but why should I be the one to leave? This was my home. Then, one evening, my father called. You need to come to dinner, he said, his voice firm. It's time. Time for what? To sit down with Jake. To talk. I nearly laughed. I have nothing to say to him. You're my sons, Dad said, quieter now. And no matter what he did, I won't let this tear our family apart. It was easy for him to say. He wasn't the one whose life had been ripped to shreds, but he was our father. And despite everything, I didn't want to lose my family. So I went. The dinner was awkward, tense. My mother tried to force small talk, but the elephant in the room was impossible to ignore. Then, finally, Jake put his fork down. I know you don't want to hear this, he said, but I'm sorry. Truly. I let the silence stretch, my fingers tightening around my glass. Are you happy? I asked. He hesitated. Emily shifted uncomfortably beside him, staring down at her plate. She looked thinner, like she hadn't been sleeping well. It gave me some twisted sense of satisfaction. I thought I would be, Jake finally admitted. But it's not that simple. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You thought love would erase the guilt? He didn't answer. I looked at Emily. And you? Was it worth it? Her eyes glistened, and for a moment she looked like the woman I once loved. I don't know, she whispered. That was all I needed to hear. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I don't hate you, Jake, but I don't know if I can ever forgive you. He nodded slowly, accepting it. Then I turned to Emily. And you? You don't get to sit here and play the victim. You made your choice. Live with it. She flinched, but she didn't argue. I left without looking back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Months passed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living for myself. The bitterness hadn't completely left me, but it no longer dictated my every thought. I focused on work, picked up old hobbies, and even forced myself back into the dating scene. Nothing serious, just casual conversations over coffee, quiet walks in the park. It felt strange at first, like I was learning to be a new person in my own skin. Then, one evening, I ran into Emily. It was at the grocery store, of all places. I turned the corner, and there she was, staring blankly at a shelf of cereal boxes. She looked different. Tired, worn down. Her hair was messier than I ever remembered it being, and there were dark circles under her eyes. When she noticed me, she froze. "Hey," she said, barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to keep walking, pretend I hadn't seen her. But another part, the one that still ached from the betrayal, wanted answers. "You look—" I hesitated. "You okay?" She let out a dry laugh. "That's a complicated question." I waited, watching as she fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. "Jake and we broke up," she admitted. The words should have meant something to me, but all I felt was a dull, detached curiosity. "Why?" She swallowed hard, looking anywhere but at me. "Because it wasn't real. Or maybe it was, but not the way I thought. The guilt, the shame, it ate away at us. He resented me for what happened. I resented him for not being you." That last part caught me off guard. I should have felt smug, vindicated. Instead, all I felt was tired. "You made your choice," I said, keeping my voice even. "I know." Her eyes met mine, filled with something that looked like regret. "And I have to live with it, but if I could go back, Don't," I cut in. "You can't take it back, Emily. Neither of you can." A beat of silence passed between us. Then she nodded, blinking rapidly as if to hold back tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not that it matters now, but I am." I didn't tell her I forgave her. Maybe I never would. But I no longer felt the weight of her betrayal crushing me. I gave her one last look, then walked away. And for the first time in a long time, I knew. I was finally ready to move on. Walking away from Emily that night should have been the end of it. But life, as I'd come to learn, rarely offers clean breaks. A week later, Jake showed up at my door. I considered ignoring him, letting him stand outside in the cold until he gave up, but something inside me told me to face him, to finally put this to rest. When I opened the door, he looked just as bad as Emily had. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something closer to desperation. "Can we talk?" he asked. I sighed and stepped aside. He hesitated before walking in, like he wasn't sure if he was still allowed in my home. Good. He shouldn't be. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us until he finally spoke. "She told you, didn't she? That you two broke up?" "Yeah." He nodded, rubbing a hand over his face. "I thought she was what I wanted. I thought what we did was, I don't know, fate. Some kind of twisted love story?" He let out a humorless chuckle. But all it did was ruin everything. I leaned back in my chair, watching him. "You sound surprised." Jake flinched. I was an idiot. No argument there. He sighed, shaking his head. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I probably don't deserve it, but I miss my brother." The words hit something deep inside me, but I didn't let it show. I miss the way things used to be, he continued, and I hate that I was the one who destroyed it. I stared at him for a long moment, thinking about all the memories we shared, good and bad. Thinking about the pain he caused, the damage that couldn't be undone. I don't know if we can ever go back, I admitted, but I don't want to hate you anymore. Jake looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. That's enough for me. It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't a hug, or an easy laugh, or an instant fix, but it was something. And maybe, for the first time since this whole mess began, that was enough. Forgiveness is a strange thing. People talk about it like it's an action, like flipping a switch. But I've come to learn it's more like a slow unraveling, something you decide to let go of, piece by piece, until one day the weight just isn't there anymore. Jake and I didn't suddenly become brothers again overnight. There were still things left unsaid, still wounds that hadn't fully healed. But I didn't push him away when he reached out. That was the first step. And Emily? She faded into the past like an old song I once loved but no longer needed to hear. Life moved forward. I took a promotion at work, finally throwing myself into something that didn't revolve around heartbreak. I reconnected with old friends, went to the gym again, even started picking up hobbies I'd long forgotten about, like painting. It wasn't anything spectacular, just abstract shapes and colors thrown onto a canvas, but it felt good to create something instead of mourning what was lost. Then, one night, I met her. It wasn't anything dramatic. No fateful collision of coffee cups or lingering eye contact across a crowded room. Just a simple interaction at a bookstore. She was reaching for the same novel I was, our hands brushing for half a second. She laughed, letting me take it. I think you want it more than I do, she joked. I smirked. Or maybe I just have better taste. She raised an eyebrow. Bold assumption. What if I was getting it for a friend? Then your friend has excellent taste. She laughed again, and just like that, a conversation sparked. Her name was Lena. She was a graphic designer, had an obsession with crime novels, and made sarcastic comments with the same ease that most people breathed. We ended up getting coffee that night, then another a few days later. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't wondering what Emily was doing or whether Jake still felt guilty. I was just there, in the moment, learning about someone new. Maybe this wasn't some grand, life-altering love story. Maybe it wasn't even the beginning of anything serious. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Lena and I kept seeing each other. Slowly at first. Casual coffee dates, long walks, late-night texts filled with dry humor and book recommendations. She didn't push for anything more, and I appreciated that. One night, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. So, what's your story? I knew what she meant. We'd been seeing each other for almost 2 months, and I had never brought up my past. She had been patient, letting me exist in the present, but I could tell she was curious. I took a deep breath. It's complicated. She smirked. The best stories usually are. I chuckled, running a hand through my hair. All right, the short version? My wife left me for my brother. Lena didn't react with shock or pity, just a slow, understanding nod. Damn, she said after a moment. That's some Shakespeare-level betrayal. I laughed, but it was genuine this time. Yeah, something like that. Do you hate them? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. Did I? No, I admitted. Not anymore. It was the truth. The bitterness had faded. It had been replaced by something softer, something closer to acceptance. Jake had made his choices. Emily had made hers. And I had made mine. Lena nodded, leaning back against the bench. You know, I like that about you. What? That you didn't let it turn you into someone angry. You're still you. I didn't know how to respond to that. Instead, I just smiled. 1 year later, I never thought I'd find happiness again. Not after everything. But life, it seemed, had other plans. Lena and I had moved in together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was real. And that was enough. As for Jake, we were civil. We saw each other at family events, exchanged the occasional text. It wasn't the same as before, and it probably never would be. But I had stopped holding on to the past. And Emily? I heard she moved out of state trying to start over. I wished her well, but I didn't need to know anything more than that. One night, as Lena and I sat on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of shared silence, she turned to me with a small smile. "You never answered my question," she said. "What question?" "Back when we first met, about your story." She nudged me playfully. "Do you think it has a happy ending?" I thought about everything I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty, but also the growth, the forgiveness, and the second chance I never saw coming. I took her hand in mine, kissed her fingertips, and smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I think it does." A year had passed since the betrayal, and life had finally started to feel normal again. Lena and I had built something real, something solid. Jake and I were on speaking terms, though we'd never be the same. And Emily? She had disappeared from my life completely, or so I thought. One evening, Lena and I were at home, curled up on the couch, watching some crime documentary she had convinced me to sit through. The rain outside tapped softly against the window, the kind of soothing background noise that made you feel safe. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about Jake." I sat up, staring at the message. My heart tightened. I didn't recognize the number, but something about it felt wrong. "Everything okay?" Lena asked, noticing the shift in my expression. I hesitated, then shook my head. "It's probably nothing." But something about the message wouldn't leave me alone. I called Jake, straight to voicemail. Tried again. Nothing. A chill crawled up my spine. Then another text. "Unknown number? Come to the old diner on 5th, now before it's too late?" "Before it's too late?" Lena frowned as she looked at me. "What's going on?" I exhaled, debating whether to tell her, but something told me I had to go. "I'll be back soon," I said, grabbing my keys. The place was almost empty when I arrived. The flickering neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie red glow on the wet pavement. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Then I saw her, Emily. She sat in a booth at the back, her face pale, eyes darting around nervously. She looked terrified. I hadn't seen her in a year. And now, here she was, out of nowhere, asking to meet. I approached cautiously. "Emily." She flinched, looking up at me with wide eyes. "You came." "You said it was about Jake," I said, my voice firm. "What's going on?" Her hands trembled as she gripped her coffee cup. She looked over her shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. "He's gone," she whispered. A cold weight settled in my chest. "What do you mean, gone?" Her lips quivered. "I mean, someone took him." I stared at her, my mind racing. "That doesn't make sense. Who?" She slid something across the table. A small torn envelope. My name was scrawled across it in shaky handwriting. I picked it up, my fingers feeling numb as I pulled out the note inside. The words made my blood run cold. "He took from you. Now, you'll know how it feels. A friend." I looked up at Emily, my pulse pounding. "Who sent this?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I think someone's been watching us. Watching you." The rain outside had turned into a full downpour, hammering against the windows. A distant flash of lightning illuminated the parking lot. Something about the darkness beyond the glass felt wrong, like someone was out there, watching, waiting. And then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. One down. One more to go. My breath caught. I turned to Emily, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then, slowly, I looked down at the note again. One down. One more to go. My blood ran ice cold. They weren't just after Jake. They were coming for me next. To be continued.